Hello people, Nico here. Recently I have noticed at least two videos, one from Messenger and one from Stardust, that mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Since I'm presuming that most of you, or the majority of you at least, have watched their videos, I will completely ignore Maslow's content and I will try to tackle the subject from a different angle. It's not during life that our priorities become clear, gentlemen. It is towards the end. This is because our needs and wants are more or less met in this society that we live in, that the spiritual journey is the one that people regret the most towards the end of their lives. Their journey, as inevitably the majority of men and women find towards the end, has been unfulfilling and incomplete. Think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs as guidance, as what a human needs in life, and as you climb up the ladder, the more the things become more difficult to achieve. If, for example, as human beings we were stuck in a world without tomorrow, a world where we had to fight for our very survival, getting by and achieving our physiological needs would be enough to constitute happiness. But as we're living in a developed society, we reach this point where more and more of our needs are satisfied naturally. As such, the journey goes up and up and up towards the very end of the self-actualization process. Therefore, men and women, towards the end of their road, they find themselves dying and feeling incomplete and unhappy. The self-actualization is not really achieved, it is incomplete, as a man and a woman, in the end, find themselves not finding the answers to the most troubling of questions. And that question mainly is, what was the point of my life? And that is because once all of your needs are met, once you have tried so hard to meet every need, you either do not have enough time, or you do not have enough energy, or you simply do not know how to satisfy yourself prior to the end. What that means is that people do not live a fulfilling life. In a video that I produced in the past called Men Have Forgotten Their Ways, I touched this truth, but I have not really explored it. I spoke about my grandfather's world and how people knew how to evaluate friendships and connections with other people back then. However, at present, we seem to be unable to. Rethinking this very concept, I have come to realize that the majority of exploration that takes place in this society that we live in now is one that is quite esoteric. One person looks inside to find what one truly wants to be and tries his hardest to achieve his ideal self. Therefore, in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're talking specifically about the highest peak on that pyramid. I've found time and time again butting heads with people who seem to be unable to understand why my priorities are not sex or love or whatever earthly. But my priorities are that of moral issues, discussing gender dynamics, masculinity, understanding oneself, and exploring my own unhappiness and happiness. That seems to be either too much for people or quite deeply insignificant to them. I have realized now that the people can operate at different levels of this ladder at different points in their lives. Sure, age, financial stability, work opportunities allow for a person to climb up the hierarchy pyramid, but I will argue that for the majority of us, at least those that have more or less walked enough in life and have experienced things, we want to enable ourselves to truly be happy. And as such, we need to crack the very last hurdle. And that hurdle is that of self-actualization. One that I think is harder, not in terms of work that you need to put into, but rather that hurdle is one that is counterintuitive almost. Self-actualization is allowing the mind to understand the mind, meaning that you need to, for once, look at yourself in the mirror and examine your actions, understand them, appreciate them, and act in a direction that your personalities and self fits into. So the mind understands the actions of the reflective mind and as such plans an endeavor in order to fulfill the last remaining muscle of your body, and that is the mind. It is as such a spiritual experience, what that does not necessarily involve God or religion. At this point, I want to take some parts out of an article from Guardian and read you the 5 regrets of the dying and expand on them. The link for the article is found, of course, in the description. So the 5 regrets of the dying are: I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life that others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I'd have the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. I wish that I had let myself be happier. Though these ideas are coming from a blog post from a palliative nurse, I will actually argue that more or less the observations are quite correct. The reason why I'm saying this is from observation from patients and discussions that I have had with them. They are the same regrets that I would have had if I was dying. They're quite regular regrets that you hear people describing all the time. Take it from me, these regrets are quite natural. It is not the regrets themselves that I want to examine though, it is the nature of these regrets. These are the regrets of people who have not achieved self-actualization. These are the regrets of the people who have not had enough time or formed their priorities right in order to live life like they wanted to live it. They are the regrets of a human being that has not cracked it, and by it, I mean the meaning of life, the meaning of his or her existence, and the purpose that they had on this planet. They are the regrets of a person who could potentially be happier and they're not happy yet. I don't find the regrets strange, but rather the fact that even at the end, people are reminiscing the past and not living the present. So it is not strange that they haven't cracked it, as they're still going back and forth and not accepting who they truly are. If they did, they would live in the present unshackled by the failures of the past. For some people, knowing that they're dying, this death sentence, if you like, becomes almost a revelation. It almost answers most questions because they don't feel like they need to hold back anymore, especially on living their lives, and they just go out and live it. The end has a way of showing people what their wants really are. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure given enough life experience, if you live a more or less healthy life, death will come and find you full of regrets about your life. But is it truly necessary to go to the very end in order to understand what your purpose is, what your goals are, what you want to get out of your life? I would argue that life itself is not a road to happiness. Our aim should not be our ultimate happiness. Our aim should be to find goals and challenges to constantly be discontent in order to achieve some temporary moments of feeling content. The true unlocking of your inner workings can only happen if you truly know you, and that's where the journey should start. I think people continuously confuse their lives as almost like a movie where a great understanding will suddenly occur to them in a flash or a dream, and then their life will change forever for the better. Happiness is not a constant supply of dopamine and serotonin. You're not going to feel content all of the time. Surely there are moments of great clarity, and for me, understanding that I was an atheist was like wearing a brand new glasses and seeing the world in full HD. It happened once more when I came across the first couple of MGTOW videos and I started to truly understand things. But those moments are gone now. That initial excitement of understanding and the endless possibilities that understanding brings get replaced by normality. This lack of continuous intellectual excitement bothers me, and it is a moment that is well sought after. I have been alive for almost 30 years and I have only experienced it twice. I can only imagine if you don't do any soul searching, fact searching and experimentation of you will find it possibly no times. These aha moments are also dangerous as they lead a lot of people to dangerous paths. They seem to be sought by people claiming to have the answers to everything. They seem to take the mind captive, and it takes a mind that's really independent in order to break away from the narrative. Fortunately for MGTOW, the narrative is that there is no narrative. Go and find your own purpose, right? But I have thought about it, and I understand that if I'm at least undergoing this journey alone and I'm describing the process here, I might as well do it for everyone to hear, since perhaps one or two of you might understand what I'm doing internally and reflect it in your own lives. So in summary, the aim of life should not be to be lived for absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure is not the point of life. Rather, life should simply be lived fully. Don't listen to these new age bullshit coming from mystics and idiots. When people wanted to be happy all the time, they smoked opium, and that eventually resulted in the collapse of a whole empire. Satisfaction in your life comes from many and varied things. In actual fact, the more varied your life is, the more hobbies you have, the more activities that you engage in, all these things combined make you a more balanced person, able to find pleasure in things. But again, even if you're just undertaking a couple of things, I find that pleasure should not be expected. I mean, this has been hypothesized by many philosophers. Take everything in moderation. But the argument can be broken down further. If you engage in many activities, small achievements in those activities can overshadow failures in other aspects of your life because you have a lot of things going on. This uniquely varied experience of life shows you what your true wants are, and then you can focus on aspects that you want to spend more time in engaging in. And this takes us back to the previous point, coming even more closer to self-actualization. So in order to do this, of course, you need the time to do it, and time means less engagement with the opposite sex. And if you do not enjoy the time argument, then think of it like this. If you want to break new ground, if you want to go where other people have not gone before, if you want your thoughts to explore yet unexplored domains of life, then you must appreciate that those domains will come if you break away from the chains that hold you captive in this finite thinking box. Therefore, you need to explore outside the realms of everyday life. Everything already explored will potentially not have the answers that you alone are looking for. I know you guys know me, and this seems to be an odd thing to say, as I do engage on occasion with the opposite sex, but my time engagement is that of minimum effort and maximum reward. When the effort overshadows the reward, and you can tell that very early on, I give up and I move on. It's not that women do not have a place in my life or your lives, but they should be put in a neat box, much like everything else in your life. This is a lesson that boys should be taught in school and fathers should teach their sons. I think it's that essential. But it seems to be that lack of engagement with the opposite sex can lead to life feeling empty at times, and I can attest to the fact that on occasion I feel empty and at times lonely, but then I remember what is causing this. I remember my libido is taking over. I remember that all it takes is to set up a Tinder account and try for a week, and sex will most definitely be on its way. Therefore, I just sit back and relax. If I really want it, I take the time and I start engaging in that activity. But the majority of the times, especially since taking the red pill, I take charge of my own reality. As a boy, I was born, but not in a completely blank slate, but as blank as a slate can be. My eyes were connected, but the images were not focused. What the images were, what the colors were, the names, the categorization of everything had to be learned. Depth, time, past and present, all of these things needed to be learned. My brain built my reality, and my reality is always viewed through the lens of my imagination, and an imagination which has been built and modified both by social influences and biological influences. The reality is irrefutable, and that reality is mine. But during those times, I understand that if my reality is that, if I understand that aspect of reality, then all it takes is to simply take a breath, pause, and reimagine my world anew, so that I do not fall back into old patterns, do not fall back in their reality, and I push myself back on the track of my own direction, and live the reality that I want to live. This takes no time at all. It is simply a shift in the frame of reference. This frame of reference is my unique and calculated reality, what I call the Nico reference. The red pill and my involvement in making content has created an almost like an alter ego, a self that exists and is thinking at times different thoughts to me. Nico and I, though, are the same person, and sometimes it takes time to reconnect with that reality and be true to myself. At times I felt disconnected with this version of me, especially when I used to do that god-awful voice for Nico. Hello, my brother. But since I reverted back to my real voice and understanding that Nico is simply not an online persona, things landed into place for me. I believe the MGTOW you is really you, and at times all it takes is to remind yourself of that and things fall neatly into place. The MGTOW self, the self that a lot of the brothers seem to forget, is a self that is non-conformist and speaks plainly and clearly to the outside world as an individual. It needs no backup, it needs no support. The support of his own mind is good enough for him. People have been going about this journey for ages, with religion, with philosophy, and now we're doing the same thing. This is nothing new. We're simply men that understand the risks involved for our personal freedoms, and we simply want to engage in something else, something new, our own personal journey. Maybe we have that idea that we should not get married in common. Perhaps we even have an inner thirst for knowledge and an inner direction towards truth and searching for our direction in life. But in essence, a lot of the things that do not make us fit in are not simply the fact that we were rejected from life. I find it hard to tell you guys with a straight face that I was rejected, because I wasn't. Yet I find it difficult to conform to the social norms and social structures and the status quo that people other than myself decided for me. I do not think that I would do well in a system that dictates the rules for me. Therefore, by steering away from that system, I can maintain a sense of sanity and continue my efforts to fulfill me. I speak about selfishness all the time. I have used esoteric reflections in the past in order to keep me away from using that word, as people have a distinct distaste for it. But sometimes a stick of butter is simply that, a stick of butter. And this is indeed what this is. I guess life is temporary, sure. There is not going to be any glory for any of us, or at least most of us. There's never going to be a lasting change for us. But this temporary existence of mine makes me search for a lasting answer to my questions and my directions. And it's not going to be a lasting and final answer. It's going to be possibly a process rather than an answer, a process of self-reflection, self-discovery, and direction that I set myself for myself. My life is purely a selfish endeavor, as should be yours. And understanding this is halfway reaching the answer to what you really want from your lives. It's halfway reaching towards self-actualization. It's not about being somebody, it's not about being remembered, it's not about pleasure, it's not even about happiness. It's about the search for that feeling of mindlessness, of complete awareness of my surroundings, of being in the moment, every moment. Able to experience it all, like a man alone in the forest, walking among the trees, admiring life, with no thoughts and no worries troubling my mind. In summary, my brothers, the ultimate goal for the MGTOW journey is that of self-actualization. The final step to MGTOW is at the top of that pyramid. This is something that you have to do on your own, though, and not something that we can do together. It's important to remember that, but I will continue to detail my ideas as I'm going through it, and I hope you guys get something out of it. Hope you're well, and take care.